Hello, Mike here at GameFromScratch, and today we're going to be taking a look at the CryEngine from Crytek Software. Basically, this is CryEngine 5.4 we are looking at, and the reason I'm looking at it is twofold. First off, CryEngine 5.4 was just released a couple days ago, and this led me to take a look at it. Now, full-on confession right up front. I've kind of given up on CryEngine, or at least I had. When they first released it, it was very much for first-person shooters only. It was very inaccessible. It had terrible documentation. The tools were a little questionable, and it was really first-person shooter oriented really strongly. It was almost a mod kit at the time. And then it was probably also the hardest one to use. And in that time period, Unity and Unreal just got better and better and better, and CryEngine just kind of didn't. And then CryEngine 4 came around and they really changed things up. Basically, they went free. They made the tools completely available. Everything is open source. So this is definitely a lot more appealing. And I went to download it and get going with it, and I could never get the installer to work. Their login servers didn't work. When I did get in, it was a mess. It was huge. It was poorly documented, etc. So I'd pretty much kind of given up on CryEngine as an engine, in all honesty, at least as far as indie developers go. If you're a smaller team, you can't get by with an engine with terrible support, terrible documentation, etc. But with the release of 5.4, I decided, you know what, I'll take one last look at it, see if it's improved, see if it's accessible, see what the experience is like. And I have to say they have improved it a whole lot. Getting up and running is a lot smoother. The documentation is a whole lot better. So there's basically really good documentation on all of the tooling. However, the documentation for the programming side of things is still a little iffy. But across the board, it is a heck of a lot better looking. So let's do a quick dive into CryEngine. Actually, before that, let's talk about the 5.4 release for a second. So this release actually added a fair bit of support. First off, we've got Substance was integrated. Substance is a PBR-based painter. It's kind of becoming the new norm, and they've integrated it directly into CryEngine. 5.4 has terrain blending, improved ways of basically creating levels, detail, overhangs, terrains on objects, much more flexibility. Vulkan API support has been added, Vulkan being the new OpenGL basically for the future, a much more lower level to the hardware, supposed to be more GPU friendly. And then we get into like better graphics, improved C# templates, which we're going to see in a second. And that's one of those big things about CryEngine is C# is one of the developer languages. Basically, there's two levels of programming here. You've got your game engine level, so the low-level muck, and that can be done in C++ or in C# now. And that's different from Lumberyard. Lumberyard being the Amazon's fork of CryEngine, which is also available free. So the two main languages here are C++ and C#, and that is not an option with Lumberyard. And then when it comes to scripting, you have Lua script and you have Flowgraph, and we'll look at both of those very briefly as we go forward. But they've been adding C# templates, and they're going to be adding more. We'll look at this when we actually go ahead and create one a little bit later on. Asset system has been updated, cleaner, better to use. GitHub pull requests, the Photoshop Ultimate Texture Saver plugin, and various other changes, and updates to the documentation, etc. So basically, it's been kind of an incremental improvement. I decided to check this guy out, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to look at today isn't necessarily to 5.4, but it's massive improvements from when they first launched 5. So if you haven't checked out CryEngine in a little while, it might be worth going back. And let's start off with some pretty eye candy. One of the things they did was stripped out the demos from actually being built into CryEngine, and now you can actually download them on your own. They're about 4 gig. And I guess before we move on too far, let's talk quickly about price. Now, one of those things about CryEngine is it is actually completely free, and the source code is on GitHub. Do what you wish. Now, where do they make their money? Well, it sounds like what they're aiming for is to make it in user support and consulting and that kind of stuff. So they've got a pair of memberships available, basically give you a discount on support packages, help with project kickoffs, dedicated account manager, etc. So, if you need help on those levels, or if you need quick support response or semi-quick support responses, then there is a paid tier available. And of course, you can pay for support on a usage basis. So they're really getting it on the services side of things. So the engine truly is absolutely and utterly free. And unlike Lumberyard actually requires you to use Amazon services. Crytek has no such requirements. So if you don't need them for anything, this is 100% free. There are no royalties like in Unity or in Unreal, there's no subscription, no nothing. So that's definitely a point in Crysis's favor, or CryEngine's favor. Now let's fire up the sexy example. Oh, I already did. I don't know why it thinks there's an instance running. It might be time for me to be doing a reboot. All right. So the Sandbox is loading. Sandbox is basically their editing environment. You can see it here. This is in scripting mode or flow graph mode. We'll go back to their default layout mode. And now let me just switch over here and open up a level. I'm going to open up their Woodland single player demo, and you're going to have an idea of just how beautiful CryEngine actually is. All right, so here we go. Here is an example level running in the browser. I'm getting 30 to 40 frames per second. I'm on a 970M laptop, decent laptop, but nothing overwhelming. So you do get pretty responsive play. You use the ASDF keys, or WASD keys, sorry, to navigate the world. And as you can see, it is a pretty impressive thing. I'm going to go ahead and actually play the scene in the engine. And this is the demo, as I said. So it's basically full on demo. You'll see particle systems dropping leaves from above. Got daytime lighting. Got full shooting. Got a couple of chickens here. I don't think you can actually shoot them, though. This is the world. I'm going to go and try and find the waterfall so you have an idea of just how beautiful this engine actually is. And this is running at 50 frames per second with me having recording software in the background, potentially an orphaned instance running there somewhere. And of course the editing software open. So it is responsive. Here we go. So we're in the waterfall. We'll go up there and we'll get the pixel shader going on the screen. You'll see there's the water effect going on. It's a cool and capable demo to show you basically the powers of CryEngine in effect. Now you'll notice here throughout the scene we got these various different scene elements, and you can pick them over here from the level explorer, which is basically your scene graph. So main, various different shapes. I don't know if it'll focus automatically. So you'll see over here then the different aspects that make this guy up. So that's not an entity. I need an actual entity. So there you see here an entity now is available, and you can add various different components to it. The entity component system is pretty much becoming the industry standard. On top of that, we've got the two different programming models. So if I come to this guy, try and find a guy that actually has a script attached to it. All right, so here is one such example. The Forest Sky Dome has a script attached to it. You see over here, we got the Lua Properties panel, and you can see there's a script here. So I'll go ahead and edit it. And here you can see how a Lua script works. Pretty straightforward. You're handling various different callback events. So geometric entry, geometric entity, and you see when it's entity removed, this is called hide, physics break, on init, etc. So you're handling various different callbacks, on load, on save. And you can code or script your game logic this way if you wish, using Lua scripts. Your other option built in, and we're not going to get into detail on either of these, to be honest. First off, because I don't really know a great deal about either method, to be honest. And again, this is where their documentation does fall down a bit. Their Lua scripting documentation or flow graph documentation does leave a little bit to be questioned. Now, the stuff about using your tools is actually very, very solid. The rest of this is a little iffy, but let's come on in here. As you see, gameplay item. I think one of these guys controls, the waterfall in the scene. Let's see if this is the complex. No. So that waterfall we stood in, here is a flow graph actually controlling it. And you see this flow graph looks a whole lot like a blueprint. It's much more primitive. It generates an XML file, I believe, behind the scenes. I also think it has like a lower overhead, so it should probably be faster. So this is another option for basically setting how your program is going to interact. So we come in here, we can see, we're handling on game start, the output of will wire up to this entity, this entity, this entity, do whatever, wire out to this entity, and you see the wires just basically keep going. Your program flow follows the different wires and out. And you see, you can get a fair amount of complexity here. So if you're down with the visual programming or you're going to hand this off to your designers, Flowgraph is definitely an option. Flowgraph is also available on Lumberyard, coincidentally, as is the Lua scripting option. So those are your two basic options. Now let's drop back and actually look at a brand new example, something a little bit more straightforward and simplified. So we're not going to save this guy. Don't need the code example right here. And come on back to your launcher, and we're just going to go ahead and create a new project. And you've got a pair of options here. 1 second. You can either go the C++ route or the C# route. And if you see in C++, there's quite a few more templates. There is a rolling ball, a side scroller, first-person shooter, third-person shooter, top-down, a plug-in, or an isometric view. Or if you go to C#, and they're working on bringing more in, this is what they added in the 5.4 release, you've got the rolling ball, plug-in, and third-person. And today what we're going to do is look at the third-person example. So come here, get this, Crytek, projects. Actually, let's just do a new folder under Crytek. Make new folder, YouTube. Okay, and we will call the third person. And we'll go ahead and create that project. So this is a simple C# project we're going to look at, and it's nice because it allows you to start with much simpler tools. Now, if you do come back in here, the landscape tools are staggeringly powerful. They're very cool to look at. They demo very well, and you saw the results of them in the other. There's a terrain crafter. You can place entities in your scene. There's time of day. There's environmental effects and all of that stuff. But we're looking more at the bare bones basics here. So let's go ahead. Third person was created. Let's load that up. I still have that orphan instance running somewhere. So run this out, and here is a very stripped down example. So come in, we'll open up our level, and this is a very, very, very simple example. Go ahead, we can run it out, hit play, and so you can just kind of run around the world like so, and then I can shoot shapes. You see physics are applied, and really that's about it. Pretty straightforward stuff, and I don't know that there's actually any scripting involved in this one. So if I come down here and look at the assets, objects, characters, sample character, let's go ahead and grab our character. So no Lua script attached to him. I don't think there's a flow graph attached. Let's see, we'll open up the flow graph, see if there actually are any. No, so no flow graphs attached. So how is this guy being controlled? Well, this is actually kind of an interesting approach they've taken. If I come back here, basically, to the project I just created, so we'll go into Crytek, and I just call that third person YT. You'll see here you've got your game.cry project. And this is ultimately, behind the scenes, going to generate you a project. So I can actually right-click that guy and say, Generate Solution. And this is going to actually create me an SLN file I could open in Visual Studio. Now the catch is, it's Visual Studio 2015, and I'm doing everything in my power to not install Visual Studio 2015 because frankly, it installs so many dependencies, it's so messy. Now that 2017 is here, I've moved on and I am not going back. So I'm not going to get into actually loading that code up or building it or anything like that, but I will show it to you. So let's head on over to the code it generates. So there's the SLN file it just created for us. You'll see here we got our game directory. So what I'll do is let's shift click that guy. All right, yeah. So code dot. So I'm going to open this guy up in Visual Studio Code instead. So here is the project that is created for you. You can see you've got various different controllers. So here is your game code. C# powered. Obviously, if you picked C++ as your option earlier on, you would get C++ code. And that's what's controlling this guy. We come in here. Here is your player. Here's the code behind the player. And it's hooking back into the entities from the editor, as you can see here. So the player's geometry URL is being defined by objects, characters, sample character, third person. And so if I go on back over here, you'll see, oops, assets, objects, characters, sample character. All right, where the hell is third person? Anyways, so the code goes behind the scenes and handles it. This is ultimately your game code right here. So you can see various different settings have been added. And then when you've gone ahead and you add something in your game world, you can publish it out to your game code. And I will show you that process in a second. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and show bringing an Fbx file in as an example. And I think if I just do back a couple times, yeah, here we go. Shipping container Fbx. I think it's set up for using TIFFs. Diffuse. Displace. Normal. Ambient. I don't believe it actually uses all those, but, and the Fbx. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just drop these assets into our newly created project. So go back over here to Crytek, third person, assets, and we'll toss this in objects. And we'll make a new folder here, shipping. Okay, so we head on back over to CryEngine. So we go game, sorry, tools, Fbx import, mesh. Okay. One second. It might have just been a bit delayed, so click here for import. Crytek, third person, assets, objects, shipping container. Alrighty, and I did not get my materials for some reason. Generate material, shipping. There you go. All right, so there is my model now imported. All right, so I'm not entirely sure what I did wrong here, but you basically just do a file, save as, and then drop it in the direction you want it to be. So here I'm going to drop it in shipping as shipping.cgf. I've already done that, so it should now be in there and ready to go. Sorry about the confusion there. Again, I am no master of CryEngine. I've only been using this for a day or two, so it's all on me, not on CryEngine here. So there we have our entity now. I can go ahead and drop one into the scene like so. And you'll see it's just instanced into the scene. Or what I can do now that I've instanced it is I can come on down here and convert it to an entity, which is now done. And now we can add components to it, which is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to grab this guy now in our scene. Let's go to the move operator. This guy. Oops. Obviously grabbed the wrong thing. Move him up. And let's add some physics to this guy. So add component to our mesh. We are going to add, this should already be a rigid body created by default. If you want it to send a code that a collision occurred, you can check this guy right here. So now what we're going to do is actually add a component for a box collider. You'll see the shape is added on top here. Now we just need to size this guy out a bit. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, it's a manual process. So we need to set the size. Let's set that to about 3.4, I think. Yeah, probably a little smaller. 3.2. And let's move it slightly. Wrong way. And now we need to just move it down a bit. There. So now we have a box collider attached to our entity. Let's go ahead and see what's going to happen in our scene. So first thing you need to do, remember I mentioned how your code is kind of on the back end, editors on the front end. So when you make a change like this in your editor, you have to do is a file, export to engine. So now that code will now be out and available to your code. Let's go ahead and do a run. And hey, the hell just happened? It's flying off into space. And as far as I can tell, I think this is a gravity thing. And to go on back to my shipping container, and we will set its mass significantly higher. And that will keep it terrestrial bound. So I turn over there. Okay, and there is my shipping container. And now you will see, boom, I can interact with it, bounce off it, etc. So bringing your own assets into the world aren't really that difficult of a process. On top, we can get into a fair bit of control now that we have our own object in here. Let me just exit out of the game. We'll go back, take a look, shipping. So here is your mess your importer as we brought it in. Go over to the material on it. Click that. It brings us into our material editor. Sorry, the font DPI scaling on this is atrocious. You can set the shader type that's going to run on it, like so. We can set the shader that actually is going to run. So let's say reference image. You can see the various different the maps that are being defined. So this is diffuse and bump map are being applied to here. I have a couple others. So where's my ambient? Doesn't matter. This is where you can basically define and set up your texture map details. Other tools we can look at quickly. So you've got audio controls editor, database view, dependency graph. What does that actually show me? The dependencies that object actually has. So you can see that I've got dependency on these two different maps. What else can we do here? So tools, going back up here. Environment editor. This is where I said earlier there's all those things you can do in terms of like times of day, settings, fog colors, etc. And then you can do curve-based animations of them settings over here. So see volumetric fog, skylighting, night sky, etc. We've got flow graph we saw earlier. You can edit lens flares. Material editor we were in. There's a particle editor. And then another source or coding option is schematic. And this is a little confusing me, to be honest, because this is another graph style programming scripting option available. You got a train editor. We don't have any train in this example, but you can edit this way. I actually see if I can show you. So you see here, you can flatten lower, and I don't know how easily I could actually go ahead and add a train to this world, so I'm not going to do that. But if you've done any train sculpting, you've got a pretty good idea of what to understand. And then your vegetation editor, character tools for animations, so you control the attachments and the joints, etc. on it. Animation layers. Let's exit out of here. What else we got? Facial editor, mannequin editor, deprecated things, designer tools, Fbx importer, which we already saw. This is the new Substance integration they have for bringing in physically based shaders, etc. So again, I'm not going into a whole lot of detail because I don't understand much more than the surface level stuff. But as you can see, it is a much more accessible engine, at least than it used to be if you've used it before. We go into the documentation. Head on over here is basically this manual right here. It's okay. There's some pretty solid tutorials. They will teach you how to use Sandbox very well. Go over here to the technical documentation, and you'll see engine code documentation, getting started, etc. Game code options. So miscellaneous game code. Let's go there, for example. But what I tend to find is this is an area where they get let down a little bit. Now, there is pretty thorough documentation. It's on the programming side of things that you start getting a little iffy. We go into the code tutorials to see what they actually show us. C# programming as an example. And it shows you how to start, but it doesn't really go into a lot of detail beyond that. So the templates using C++US, console variables, etc. So, and of course we have the API reference. Oh, there's a C# one. And here are your various CryEngine classes that are available to you. So this is where, you know, from the programmer side of things, you're going to do most of your learning. So the documentation has actually improved a fair bit, but there are still sort of the tying it together pieces that are missing at this point in time. And, you know, I have to just kind of finish by saying I am more impressed by CryEngine than I was expecting to be. For a smallish team, I honestly, unless you're creating, you know, a really high fidelity first person or third person train pretty kind of game, I guess is your goal here. I don't see a lot of reason to actually choose CryEngine still over the big three out there. But if you're that medium-sized team that you can really dig in here, the fact it's completely free, it's completely open source, and it is a lot more accessible and better documented now, it's definitely something worth considering. And I actually find it a little bit more accessible and approachable than I find Lumberyard at this point in time. So it's definitely one of those ones to consider. So I had written off CryEngine as an entity completely a little while back, and I'm still a little worried about Crytek, the company, their solvency. They keep running into scandals where they're not paying people or selling off divisions, etc. So I don't know a whole lot about the future of Crytek, but CryEngine itself is looking pretty sharp. It's improving quite rapidly. It's getting easier to use, more accessible. It's definitely something that you could consider. So that was the CryEngine. Of course, I can't go into a whole lot more detail because I don't know the engine that well. So, you know, I'm not going to just bumble through it. But I hope you found, you know, this hands-on at least interesting, that there is, you know, gives you a better idea of what's going on in the world of CryEngine. The nice thing is it actually runs now. You can get it up and going very easily. So it is very much a lot easier to just jump in and give it a try now than it used to be. Basically, you just have to register for an account, download the launcher, launch the launcher, create a project, and you're off to the races. So if you're interested in checking out CryEngine, I definitely recommend you do so. So again, I hope you found that, guys, useful, guys. If you did, of course, please do click like. And we cover all kinds of game engine stuff here and game development in general, game development tools, etc. And if that sounds interesting to you, please do hit that subscribe button. All right, that's it for now. Hope you found that useful. See you all later. Goodbye.